What was supposed to be a music festival of no more than 50,000 people turned into a sprawling affair that brought together more than 400,000 and helped define this tumultuous decade. The cast of the musical production Hair rehearsed at the Porte Saint-Martin in Paris on April 22, 1969. Soon after debuting in 1967, the revolutionary production, noted for its controversial use of rock music, its embrace of the sexual revolution, and portrayal of drug use, became a cultural touchstone of the era whose legacy lives on to this day. A World War I submarine washed ashore on the beach in England. For 13 days in the fall of 1962, it seemed as if the world was going to end. Known as the Cuban Missile Crisis, this tense period saw Soviet forces attempt to move nuclear missiles to Cuba, just 90 miles from the coast of Florida. The U.S. responded by blockading Cuba with its own military forces. It was the closest the Cold War ever came to all-out nuclear annihilation. The founding of the Black Panther Party was fueled by the assassination of Malcolm X and other instances of aggression against black people throughout the country. The Black Panthers, who saw themselves largely as a political group, worked to implement social programs that addressed police brutality and helped ensure equal access to jobs and housing for black people. Samuel Reshevsky, age 8, playing against and defeating several chess masters simultaneously in France 1920. The image depicts United States Air Force Lieutenant Col Robert L. Stern reuniting with his family, after spending more than 5 years in captivity as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam. The photograph went on to become a symbol of the end of U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. Gas masks for babies being tested at an English hospital 1940. Searchlights on the Rock of Gibraltar 1942. Abraham Lincoln was a little-known one-term Illinois congressman with national aspirations when he arrived in New York City in February 1860 to speak at the Cooper Union. The speech had to be perfect, but Lincoln also knew the importance of image. Before taking to the podium, he stopped at the Broadway photography studio of Matthew B. Brady. In early 1968, the violence intensified, as fighting in Vietnam reached new heights with the Communists' devastating Tet Offensive and the Americans' brutal My Lai Massacre. A female police officer in Chicago, 1966. Russian 1960s power plant control room. Milk Drop Coronet is revolutionary stop-motion photograph, freezes the impact of a drop of milk on a table, a crown of liquid discernible to the camera for only a millisecond. The picture proved that photography could advance human understanding of the physical world, and the technology Harold Edgerton used to take it laid the foundation for the modern electronic flash. 17-year-old Pelé in Sweden before the 1958 World Cup. To many white Americans in the 1930s, black people were little more than domestics or sharecroppers. They were ignored, invisible, forgotten. But that was not what James Van der Zee saw when he gazed through his camera lens. A German communist being executed in Munich 1919. Late 19th century New York City was a magnet for the world's immigrants, and the vast majority of them found not streets paved with gold, but nearly subhuman squalor. While polite society turned a blind eye, brave reporters like the Danish-born Jacob Riis documented this shame of the Gilded Age. The Beatles arrive in America for the first time, landing at New York's newly christened John F. Kennedy International Airport on February 7, 1964. Muhammad Ali knocks out Sonny Liston after a 1-minute-long championship match in Lewiston, Maine on May 25, 1965. Just seconds after the knockout, referee Joe Walcott holds Ali back. Ali's courage both in and out of the ring would come to define the decade. Quality control at EMI Records, 1965. American soldiers discover Manet's painting hidden in the salt mines of Merkur, Germany 1945. Working as an investigative photographer for the National Child Labor Committee, Louis Hine believed that images of child labor would force citizens to demand change. The muckraker conned his way into mills and factories from Massachusetts to South Carolina by posing as a Bible seller, insurance agent, or industrial photographer in order to tell the plight of nearly 2 million children. Pre-Taliban days in Afghanistan, when women are still allowed professional careers, university education, etc. Colorful outfits on flight attendants, 1965. It's hard to believe that Farrah Fawcett was 29 years old when she took a starring role on Charlie's Angels as one of 3 female detectives. The show transformed the airwaves and gave young women their own heroes to root for. Fawcett was perhaps even more well known for her hair, those flowing blonde locks that people had been trying to recreate for decades. When Charlie's Angels premiered in 1976, no one realized that it would be the cultural touchstone that it became. That first trio, Farrah Fawcett, Jaclyn Smith, and Kate Jackson, were overnight stars, and even through cast changes the women remained close friends. While speaking in a documentary about the show, Smith explained that the thing that drove the series is their friendship on and off set. Beach bum Obert Rod and his girlfriend at the beach in San Onofre. July 1950. As a young actress, Madeline Smith appeared in a series of B-movies, but she doesn't look back on that time as something to be embarrassed about, but rather a time when she learned from the people around her. After getting her start as a model, Maren Jensen made a pivot to television, where she appeared on Battlestar Galactica as Athena before making appearances on The Love Boat. Unfortunately, her illness increased as the decade pressed, and while she stopped acting, she worked with fellow 70s legend Don Henley of the Eagles on his solo albums. His first album, I Can't Stand Still, was dedicated to her. Sporting some of the decade's most distinctive fashions, flight attendants became emblematic of the era and symbols of modern womanhood. Jamie Lee Curtis appeared Quincy, M.E., and Columbo in '77, and in 1978 she appeared in her breakout role, John Carpenter's Halloween. Following her starring role in one of the most important horror movies of all time, she popped up all over television. It was hard to miss this young starlet. Morgan Fairchild is known for playing heavies on all of your favorite soap operas from the 1970s, but she initially got into acting because she didn't want to do her schoolwork. At the Venice Beach, California Rock Festival, 1968. Harry Benson didn't want to meet the Beatles. The Glasgow-born photographer had plans to cover a news story in Africa when he was assigned to photograph the musicians in Paris. "I took myself for a serious journalist and I didn't want to cover a rock and roll story," he scoffed. But once he met the boys from Liverpool and heard them play, Benson had no desire to leave.